Hey, what's up guys? So if you want to learn how to make icicles, this is the tutorial for you. I'm gonna show you how to make these icicles, and everything is procedural. You can change pretty much everything of how the icicles look like and the shading. So yeah, this is all geometry based, so we can start with a new scene. First of all, we need to create a line. So let's Shift A and add a line. We want it to be a curved line, and we can preview this. So we have our line, then we want to have control over the resolution of the line. So we are gonna resample curve. Alright, now that we have our curve resampled, we can take the parameter, curve parameter, and we can take this curve parameter. First of all, let's make this line a mesh, curve to mesh, and we can take a circle, a curved circle. We can add this to the profile. Now we have a circle over here, and let's just lower the resolution of the circle a little bit. We don't want it to be too high because we're gonna have a lot of these. Let's make the radius 0.15, and we can change this one into a -1, so that we have, this is our start location of our vertex, which is 0, 0, 0. And if we go into this view, along the z-axis, we are going from 0 to -1. So here's the -1. And if we take our curve and we set a radius, so we just add a set curve radius, we plug it in, and we take our factor and we put it into the radius. Our factor just means we're gonna have here a 0 because it's our first point, and through this line that we have over here, we are gonna have in every single vertex from our resample curve, we have 10 vertices in this line. It's gonna go from 0 to 1, which is our last point. So what this tells us is that here I want to have a radius of 0, and along these points we're gonna have a radius of whatever is in between 0 and 1. But we don't want that. Icicles are these but backwards. So a way to do it, I think there are many ways to do it, but just a range, a map range. We plug it in and we just say is from 0 to 1. We want it to be from 1 to 0. And we have our beautiful cone. Okay, this is the first step. Let's take this and actually instance it on a plane. So let's tap into the cone, and we are gonna grab our vertex. We are gonna extrude it on the y-axis. Then we are gonna select the edge and extrude it again. Now we have our plane, and we are gonna distribute points on faces. We're gonna have to plug it in from this geometry because it's our original geometry that we have our rectangle there, and we can take those points and instance our coin into those points. So let's instance some points. We're gonna take our points and plug it into the points input, and our instance is gonna be this cone over here. So let's plug the cone here and preview it. As you can see, we have a lot of cones. They are intersecting. We can fix that, and our cones are hollow. So when we convert it into a curve, we just have to click fill caps. All right, so first of all, we're distributing these points randomly. We don't want that because we're gonna get a whole lot of intersections. So first, we are gonna take this and create a Poisson disk. What this does is create like a little sphere around our points that none other points can appear. So we have our minimum distance, which is now 0, which is doing exactly the same as random. But if we increase this number, all the ones that are intersecting are gonna start to disappear until we have like these very little ones. We can increase the density so that we have everything covered and we can see that none of them will intersect. It can intersect a little bit, like it doesn't matter. It won't show. It's actually better so that we have a denser grid here. All right, so let's add some variation to these guys. So in our scale, we can plug in a noise texture. You can also plug in a random value, but I think a noise texture looks a little bit more organic. So we're gonna first of all add a noise texture. There you go. And we're gonna combine XYZ. And we're just taking these values and plugging into this node so that we have control over X, Y, and Z separately. So we're gonna put this as 1 because our scale is gonna be 1. Okay, so if we want to affect the overall, well, let's first of all affect the scale in the Z-axis. So we have here our scale in Z-axis. We can see that we have some variation, but our variation is not that drastic. What we can do is just add a color ramp. If we get these two nodes closer to each other, we can see that we have a little bit more variation and a little bit more drastic contrast. We gotta be careful. We cannot get like these 0 values because it will look a little bit strange. Now we have to get our variation in the cone itself. Okay, yeah, I should have explained this earlier. We can make this cone taper off, and we can control the tapering of this cone just by controlling this factor over here. This factor gives us a number between 0 and 1. As I explained earlier, we have this line that is 0 to 1. So if we get a float curve and we plug it into here, we're gonna have our profile manifested in this curve. So if we take this curve and kind of move it around, first of all, we are not gonna see anything because we have to do this after we resample the curve. So let's just take our curve, put it behind, and now we have resolution on our cones. So we just want, I saw some reference images and I think this is more or less what an icicle looks like, hopefully. So something like this. There you go. I think the change is a little bit drastic, I know. But if we multiply this, so it's a math node. If we want it here, and we're just gonna press M so that we get our multiply here, and we can multiply this but a little bit, and also make it so that it doesn't end in 0. Like we can maybe end it here. We're gonna put 1 here. So if we make it so that it ends like in 0.1, so that we don't have like that straight point in the end. So yeah, we can just change a little bit our curves so that they fit, and we're changing the radius of everything. Very good. Now we have these icicles. There are different shapes, different scales, but our scale, we're only changing it in the Y direction. So for these guys to also change a little bit in between, we can change this X and Y with the same noise, so that if they are small, they are gonna be small always in the X and Y and in the Z. So we can just add another ramp, a color ramp. I think it's easier to use color ramp instead of a map range, but you can use it whenever. So we can have a little bit more variation here. There you go. We're changing also the scale, and I think it's a good time to make this a little bit smaller so that we can see how they actually look in real life. So perfect, we just need a little bit of variation in each cone. So right now we have each cone as an instance, and this instance is just a copy of our first cone. Every single one of these is just represented as a copy. So a copy you cannot change unless you actually have it. So to actually have this copy, we can make it real or realize it. So if we go into add and we realize instance, this will make it a little bit heavier on your computer. Like, it all depends how many of these instances you have, but that gives us a lot more control because we can actually edit individual cones. So let's what we want to do here is create some variation between the cones and a little bit of distortion in each of them. So to create distortion, we can actually move the vertices of each cone. So for that, we have to set position. What this does is it takes the position of every single vertex in this cone, and it can offset it. So we can move pretty much the whole thing, but we don't want to move the whole thing, we just want to move parts of it. So we can add a noise texture. As always, we grab this noise texture, we can plug it in directly, and we can see that our noise is garbage. Why? Because first of all, we're shifting everything to the right and up. That's just a thing from the noise texture, because in average the noise texture moves things 0.5 and 0.5 because it's the average between 0 and 1. But we don't want that. We want to create distortions kind of outwards. So for that, we have to take the normal of every cone. So for if you think about this, we are taking the cone, then we are instancing it into a face, into some points that we created in one face. So all of this does not have the geometry of the cone because our cone was an instance here and we couldn't do anything with that cone. So if we want to modify the cone, we would need to actually take the geometry of this cone or take it into account. So the way we can tell Blender that we want to take the cone into account is by capturing an attribute. So if we capture attribute, the placement of this attribute is very important. It has to be after you did all the changes and after you realize the geometry. Most of the time it doesn't have to be there, depending on what you want to take from this geometry. So if we put it after the realize instance and we change this instead of a float, because this will only give us a number, a random number, we can take the vector, and the vector, it could be anything, but we're gonna choose a normal vector. We're gonna add this vector into this value. That means we're telling our capture attribute that I want you to take the normal of this geometry that is passing through here. So we just tell I want the normal, and that normal I want to use it over here in the distortion. So we want to offset by the normal and we want to multiply that normal so that it increases where we want it to. If we take a vector map and we set it to multiply, and then we take our our normal and take it into multiply. We're multiplying our normal by the noise. Right now the effect is pretty big, so we can actually take this, duplicate it, and put it into, well, it could be divide or it could be scale. We can let's scale, and we can make this a little bit smaller so that our noise affects our geometry less. All right, so right now we have our distortion. Actually, we can make this a little bit bigger and increase this scale, make this a little bit bigger. I'm gonna increase the resolution so that we can see what we are actually doing, and I think this amount of variation is enough. The scale, it's good enough. Well, our distortion is actually moving everything outwards, if in some sense, because we're multiplying it by the noise texture is giving us a number between 0 and 1, and that means that nothing is going in because every number is a positive. So we can take a range, map range node. So we want to change this so that our average value is not 0.5 but is 0, so that everything on average stays in 0. So we're going to take this value, and this value gives us a number from 0 to 1, and we want to make that number from minus 0.5 to 0.5 to 0.5. This is the number that we're going to take for the multiply node. Now we have everything averaged to the middle of our cones so that we don't increase them in size. Now, like, this distortion is pretty good for this kind of cones, but what we don't want is these kind of tips. So we want to scale also this noise by the factor of our cones. So if you remember, we have the factor of these cones back here, and that factor is gonna tell us how much we have to scale this noise texture. So we could take this factor and just plug it into the scale, but it won't work because this factor is taking the factor that we have right now in the geometry, and our geometry doesn't have a factor. If you take into account, this has a lot of points and the factor doesn't work in this case. But factor works with lines, as in the beginning of the video I told you that this factor works with a line and it tells us a number between 0 and 1. So if we want to capture this attribute over here with that line, we can do exactly the same. Capture attributes. And this attribute can remember the factor, our value over here. And we can take that value and actually plug it in the scale. So we have that factor, and that's affecting our scale. Something we have to do, like our scale is from 0 to 1, so we have to also invert it. So I'm gonna use the map range node we used to invert the last one. I'm just plug it into the capture attribute node. So right now our scale is huge, so we can either scale that factor or we can multiply it. So math, it's just a math node, and we can multiply it by a very little number until we drop the scale down. Okay, so we have a problem. Oh, we are not multiplying to a very low scale. And now our noise is pretty big on top, and it goes to 0 in the scale from here. So I think we're having a pretty good setup here. We can change pretty much everything, the randomness of it, and we can just yeah, everything is procedural, and like these nodes over here are not procedural, but I like to leave them as it is, not change them too much. Like this node changes pretty much the factor in which it grows, or like the radius on top, but we can leave it here, and if we want to control the radius, we can just come here and modify the overall radius, could be, or you can also multiply this by less of a factor. All right, so I think that was it for today. In the next video, I think I'm gonna show you how to make it so that it changes in size. When it changes in size, it also changes in density, so that if we want to change the size of this, it also gets more dense because there is more space for everyone. And if we increase the size, we can also make the same, so that the ones that are intersecting will disappear. I'm also gonna show you how to you can make it so that the resolution and the max scale and the main length, like everything, so that every value that you want to change is exposed. And you can also make it so that you have sliders, so that you don't have to worry about the numbers, you just worry about one factor, and this factor is like the lowest it can be and the biggest it should be. Like, who wants this like large of an icicle, you know? So this is like the biggest scale, and just in the middle is around what you want. And you can also change like the radius here or the resolution, so that you can have more spikes without compromising on performance. Or you can change the overall scale, this is just a normal scale, or you can change the length without changing the scale. So yeah, we have a lot of control. Like, these are the first 5 that I outputted, but we can change a whole lot more things. But yeah, stay tuned for the next one. I'm also gonna show you how to make this brick texture. Like the image for this brick is just this. So how I made it so that it's snowy and it actually looks like pretty realistic. So yeah, stay tuned for the next videos. I don't know if I can make it into 1 or 2 more, but I'll see you guys later.